I never thought my life would take such a dramatic turn. It all started with my neighbor, Mark. He was the kind of guy who always had a smirk on his face. Like he knew something you didn't. He was charming, sure, but in a way that made you question whether he was genuine or just playing games. I'd seen him around the apartment complex for months, always waving hello, making small talk, and occasionally dropping hints that he found me attractive. I never took him seriously. I mean, who does? Men like him are all talk, right? Or so I thought. Mark lived 2 doors down from me, and our paths crossed more often than I'd like to admit. He'd pop up at the most random times when I was taking out the trash, checking the mail, or even when I was just sitting on my balcony enjoying a cup of coffee. He'd lean over the railing, his shirt always slightly unbuttoned, and say something like, "You're the most beautiful woman in this building, maybe even the whole city." I'd laugh it off, roll my eyes, and tell him to stop being ridiculous. But deep down, I couldn't deny that there was something about him that intrigued me. Maybe it was his confidence, or the way his eyes seemed to see right through me. Whatever it was, it made me uneasy. One evening after a long day at work, I was sitting on my couch binge-watching a show, when there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before peeking through the peephole. It was Mark. He was holding a bottle of wine, and wearing that same smirk that always made me question his intentions. "Hey, neighbor," he said when I opened the door. "I noticed you've had a rough day. Thought you could use some company." I raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you notice I had a rough day?" He shrugged. "I pay attention. Plus, you looked stressed when you got home earlier. So what do you say, a little wine? A little conversation, no strings attached." I should have said no. I should have closed the door and gone back to my show. But something about the way he looked at me made it hard to refuse. Maybe I was lonely, maybe I was curious, or maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see what he was really about. We sat on my couch, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, and before I knew it, hours had passed. The conversation eventually turned to relationships, and that's when he dropped the bomb. "I have a crush on you," he said, his tone casual, like he was commenting on the weather. I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Yeah, right. You say that to all the girls." "Oh, don't you?" He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "I'm serious. I've been trying to get your attention for months, but you keep brushing me off. I get it. You think I'm just playing games. But I'm not. I really like you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me was screaming that this was a bad idea. I told him I wasn't looking for anything serious, and he seemed to accept that. But as the night went on, the tension between us grew. There were moments when I caught him staring at me, his gaze intense, and I had to look away before I got lost in it. When he finally left, I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief, because I knew getting involved with him would complicate things. And disappointment because there was a part of me that wanted to see where this could go. A few weeks later, I was having one of those days. It was that time of the month, and I was feeling bloated, cranky, and just plain miserable. I had no energy to do anything except lie in bed and wallow in self-pity. That's when Mark showed up again. He knocked on my door, and when I opened it, he was standing there with a bag of groceries. I figured you could use some comfort food, he said, holding up the bag. Chocolate chips and your favorite ice cream. I was too tired to argue, so I let him in. He made himself at home in my kitchen, preparing a snack for me, while I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. When he brought the food over, he sat down next to me closer than I expected. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and it made my heart race. You know, he said, his voice low, you're even more beautiful when you're not trying to be. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the smile that crept onto my face. You're such a flirt only with you. He replied, his tone serious. We sat in silence for a while, eating the snacks he'd brought. But then out of nowhere, he stood up and started undressing. I froze, unsure of what was happening. He took off his shirt, revealing his toned chest. And then he unbuckled his belt. What are you doing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he dropped, and that's when I saw it. His big tool, as he called it. I was stunned. My breath caught in my throat and my heart pounded so loudly. I was sure he could hear it. My mind was a chaotic mess. Thoughts colliding and scattering like leaves in a storm. I had no idea what to do or say. Every rational part of me screamed to stop this, to push him away, to close my eyes and pretend this wasn't happening. But my body betrayed me. A heat spread through me, starting low in my stomach and radiating outward, making my skin tingle and my limbs feel heavy. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the flush creeping up my neck, betraying the desire I was trying so hard to suppress. I wanted to look away, to deny what was happening, but I couldn't. My eyes were locked on him, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. I told you I liked you, he said, his voice steady, almost calm, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. And I meant it. I want you. And I know you want me too. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, to laugh it off and pretend this was all some ridiculous joke. But the truth was, he wasn't wrong. The truth was, I did want him. Against every ounce of my better judgment, against every warning bell ringing in my head, I wanted him more than I'd ever wanted anyone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything that would make this stop. But no words came out. My voice was gone, lost in the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. And then before I could think, before I could stop myself, I gave in. What happened next was a blur. One moment we were standing there, the tension between us so thick, it felt like the air itself was charged with electricity. I didn't resist, I couldn't. My body moved on its own, responding to in ways I didn't even know were possible. We ended up the world outside fading away, until there was nothing but the heat between us. It was intense, overwhelming, and unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive, truly. Completely alive. Every nerve in my body was on fire. Every thought in my head consumed by him. The world outside didn't matter. The consequences didn't matter. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, this raw, unfiltered passion that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. It was everything I didn't know I needed. And yet, even as I lost myself in him, a small part of me screamed in the back of my mind, warning me that this was a mistake, that I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But I ignored it. I pushed it down, buried it under the weight of my desire, and let myself fall. When it was over, I lay there, my chest heaving, my skin still tingling from his touch. The room was quiet, the only sound, the soft rhythm of our breathing. He was beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his body warm against mine. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was okay, that this was what I wanted, but then reality came crashing back in. And with it, a wave of regret so strong, it nearly knocked the breath out of me. What had I done? I had crossed a line. One I knew I could never uncross. I'd given in to something I knew was wrong, something I knew would complicate everything, and now there was no going back. I turned my head to look at him. His face relaxed in the aftermath of our passion. He looked peaceful, content, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. And maybe for him it was, but for me, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering dangerously close to falling. I wanted to say something, to break the silence that felt so heavy between us. But what could I say? I regret this. This was a mistake, the word stuck in my throat, refusing to come out because the truth was, I didn't know if I regretted it. I didn't know if it was a mistake. All I knew was that I was scared. Scared of what this meant. Scared of what would happen next. Scared of the feelings I couldn't control. He stood beside me, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at me, his gaze soft but intense. And for a moment I thought he might say something. But he didn't instead. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. A gesture so tender it made my heart ache. And then, without a word, he got up and started to dress. I watched him, my mind racing, my emotions a tangled mess. I wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, to tell him that I didn't know what this was, but that I didn't want it to end. But I couldn't, the words wouldn't come. When he was dressed, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I'll see you around," he said. His voice quiet but firm, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what we'd done. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. The room felt colder now, emptier, as if his presence had taken all the warmth with him. I replayed everything in my head. Every touch, every kiss, every moment of passion, and tried to make sense of it. But I couldn't. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle, with half the pieces missing. I wanted to believe that this was just a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment that I could move on from. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just physical. It wasn't just desire. There was something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face. And as much as I wanted to pretend that this didn't change anything, I knew it did. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. My life would never be the same. Mark stayed the night, and when I woke up the next morning, he was gone. He left a note on my nightstand that said, "Last night was amazing. Let's do it again sometime." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to pretend it never happened, but another part of me wanted more. I spent the next few days avoiding him, but it was impossible. He was everywhere. And every time I saw him, I was reminded of what we'd done. Eventually, I confronted him. "What are we doing?" I asked. "This. Whatever this is, it can't happen again." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Why not? You enjoyed it as much as I did." "That's not the point," I said, my voice shaking. "This is complicated. You're my neighbor. What if things go wrong? What if we ruin what we have?" He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Or what if we make it better?" I didn't have an answer for that. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't. There was something about Mark that drew me in, something I couldn't resist. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I fell into a routine. We'd spend nights together, exploring each other in ways I never thought possible. But during the day, we acted like nothing had changed. It was thrilling, but it was also exhausting. I was constantly on edge, worried that someone would find out about us. One day, I came home from work to find Mark waiting for me in my apartment. He had a key, which he'd somehow convinced me to give him. And he was sitting on my couch with a serious expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said. My heart sank. I knew this conversation was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. "About what about us?" He replied, "I can't keep doing this. I want more. I want you." I didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, each one fighting for dominance. I cared about him more than I wanted to admit. But the idea of a relationship terrified me. Relationships were messy, complicated, and often ended in heartbreak. I'd been down that road before, and I wasn't sure I was ready to travel it again. "Marcus, why?" My voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. I looked into his eyes, those deep, piercing eyes that always seemed to see right through me. "I don't know if I can give you what you want." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. He walked over to me, each step echoing in the silence of the room. When he was close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, he stopped, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Just think about it, because I'm not going anywhere." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant what he said. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake, the feeling that this was just another game to him. A game I wasn't sure I wanted to play. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek in a gesture so tender. It made my heart ache. "I know you're scared," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't have to be not with me." I wanted to argue, to tell him that he didn't understand. But the truth was, he did. He understood me in a way no one else ever had. And that scared me more than anything. But then he pulled away, leaving me breathless and confused. He gave me one last look, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and determination, before turning and walking out the door. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt the weight of his absence pressing down on me. The room, which had felt so alive just moments ago, now seemed empty and cold. I sank onto the couch, my legs trembling beneath me, and buried my face in my hands. My mind was racing, thoughts and emotions colliding. In a chaotic storm, I replayed his words over and over in my head, trying to make sense of them. "I'm not going anywhere." What did that mean? Was he serious, or was this just another one of his games? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he cared about me as much as he said he did. But there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the fear, the doubt. That had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember. I thought about the nights we had spent together, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world that mattered. And I thought about the way he had touched me, his hands gentle yet possessive, as if he was afraid I might slip away. But then I thought about the consequences. What if things didn't work out? What if we ruined what we had? What if I got hurt? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's words continued to haunt me. He didn't bring it up again. but I could feel the tension between us every time we were together. It was like a silent tug of war, each of us pulling in opposite directions. Neither willing to let go, I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and spending time with friends. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him out of my head. He was everywhere in everything I did, a constant presence that I couldn't escape. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find him waiting for me in the hallway. Outside my apartment, he was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of determination on his face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm, eyesight too tired to argue. "Okay, but can we do it inside?" "I'm exhausted." He nodded and followed me into my apartment. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch, my body aching with fatigue. He sat down next to me, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Whatever this is, it's killing me." I looked at him, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. "What do you mean? I can't keep pretending like this is enough," he replied, his eyes filled with frustration. "I want more. I want you. And I need to know if you feel the same way." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I felt. All I knew was that I was scared. Scared of getting hurt, scared of losing him, scared of taking that leap. He reached out his hand, gently cupping my face. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice soft, "but you don't have to be." "Not with me. I'm not going anywhere." His words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I let myself believe them. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work, that maybe he was worth the risk. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's try." A smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes and lit up his entire being. He leaned in his lips, capturing mine in a kiss that was filled with promise and hope. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But as much as I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, I knew that this was just the beginning. Relationships were never easy, and ours would be no exception. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, I was willing to take that leap of faith, because sometimes the things that scare us the most are the things worth fighting for. And Mark, he was worth it.